Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the craziness going on around NIL and the NCAA against Tennessee, because that is a huge talking point in college football right now. And now we'll get into another court case. The ACC has been going at it with Florida State for quite some time now, and that is something that we have been covering on the show pretty much nonstop because conference realignment is going to be crazy this time around. I'll be totally honest with you, and I think it's a very interesting diatribe because we've all seen throughout these last couple of years where conference realignment can absolutely explode pretty much overnight, right? And that might just be coming for us pretty soon because ESPN has joined a countersuit by the ACC against Florida State in North Carolina. And this is very interesting because the ESPN group is claiming that Florida State, if they were to release details about their media deal, which some has been released already, so I wonder what's going to happen there, but it would be violating different laws and would be a huge roadblock, obviously, for Florida State to be leaving the ACC. This is obviously a very interesting development. It changes a lot of things kind of in the long term, but I don't think it changes the outcome of Florida State and the ACC. I think that outcome has been set for pretty much the second that Florida State decided that they wanted out. I think they were pretty much out of the conference, if I'm being totally honest. I think Florida State had been, I said it last week a couple of different times, where in college football, the way it works is if there's enough people with enough money that are motivated enough to do something, it's probably going to happen. And in this case, it was Florida State feeling like being in the ACC long term was not the best thing for them. They got together, and it's going to happen. So I don't want to discourage people that are scared of conference realignment and hate this new era, but it's going to happen again. There's going to be a new flood of teams that are in new conferences or without a conference or all these different scenarios, which we'll go through in a second. But I tend to believe that before Florida State steps onto the field against Georgia Tech, it will be known that this is their last year in the ACC. So how does that affect the aftermath, right? How does ESPN joining this suit affect the aftermath? Because there's a big thing here that I'm sure a lot of you have already connected the dots here, but ESPN is with the SEC, Fox is with the Big Ten. So the question is here, does this create any division between ESPN and Florida State? Does this create any problems with Florida State wanting to join the SEC? Because then you have to get right back into bed with the ESPN folks that joined a lawsuit against you. So I guess the question for Florida State will be, once all of this is done, because I tend to believe Florida State is out of the ACC, I think they will be rather shortly here because I think all of this stuff has to happen pretty quickly. Will this push them in the direction of the Big Ten? And I tend to believe that the SEC is a quote-unquote better fit for Florida State, but at the end of the day, Florida State could make more money in the Big Ten, and that's the game that we play, right? So I wouldn't be surprised at all if this pushed Florida State even closer to the Big Ten area because that's where a lot of the money is, and if you don't have to deal with the people that were in a countersuit against you, that might just be a plus. So I wonder what's going to happen with all of this. Does this create animosity between ESPN and Florida State, or is ESPN getting involved to pave the road for Florida State to get out of the conference and then join the SEC? There's tons of different dynamics here that could be at play. The ESPN obviously is the power broker in this situation. They are the ones that control the media rights, that can cut the media rights like nobody's business. They can do a number of different things throughout this process that would totally change the reality that we're living in college football. But the reality is there's going to be a big arms race soon. The last 2 years have been crazy with Texas and OU moving to the SEC, and then the craziness around the Pac-12 a year ago. This might be crazier than either of them, just by the sheer number of teams that will be bouncing around and moving all over the place. There might not be a bigger landslide than the one that is coming fairly soon to the ACC. And I think Florida State will obviously lead others with them. So the question is, if Florida State was to have a little animosity toward ESPN and go towards the Big Ten, would North Carolina, would Clemson, would Virginia, would those teams follow their suit, or would they be more inclined to go to the SEC to not be in the same conference as Florida State? So there's a lot of different competing arguments here, to be totally honest, because a lot of this stuff is totally up in the air. But at the end of the day, this really does come down to Fox against ESPN for a lot of different reasons. We've talked about it a number of different ways, but the people that make decisions in the sport are not the coaches, they're not the players, they're not even really the conference commissioners in a lot of ways. They are the people making these media deals and running these media companies. So Fox and ESPN are about to have a gold rush, whether it comes to Florida State or North Carolina or Clemson, Virginia, Georgia Tech. There's tons of teams that could find their way out of the ACC here pretty soon. And then that just leaves the door open for Fox to come with their best offer and find their way over to the Big Ten, or ESPN to come with their best offer and find their way over to the SEC. So it's going to be an absolute gold rush for either of these media companies, and I think whoever comes out on top will really pave the road for a lot of different things going on in college football going forward, because we've talked about the Big Ten and the SEC are going to run things, but if one creates a little bit of distance between the other, they would run things, because that's the nature of college football, right? But now I don't know if a huge gap can be created using these ACC teams, but at the end of the day, there could be somewhat of a gap, and the Big Ten already makes more money, already holds that card over them. So if they were to add teams like Florida State and maybe North Carolina and maybe Virginia, maybe they would have even more of an argument over the SEC. So a lot of different things at play here. And the one thing to think about in all of this is, what does the ACC do after all of this goes down? Because I think it will go down fairly soon. Does the ACC, first of all, who do they try to hold on to? Because there are some teams that, depending on what the actual dollar figure is for Florida State to leave the conference, depending on what that looks like, there are certain teams that won't be able to match that. That's just the plain truth. There's some schools out there in the ACC that just can't foot the bill that Florida State or Clemson or North Carolina can foot. So I guess the question is, first of all, what is that number? How many teams can the ACC keep around, essentially? And then who do they fill with? Because the Sun Belt is right in that area. There's tons of really good teams, whether it's App State or Troy. JMU is, bursting onto the scene. Conference USA has a ton of good teams, with Liberty obviously kind of leading the way there. There's tons of really, really good teams that they could backload with, but then where does that leave you, right? Because the reality is, when you looked at the Big 12 a year ago, when they were able to backload their conference, whatever that looked like when Texas and Oklahoma left, when they saw all this happening, and Brett Yormark, who in all of this has done an incredible job, partly because he used to be involved in TV deals. He used to be involved in TV, so his understanding for how these people think and how these people work and how these contracts all come about is pretty much second to none in the conference commissioner world. So he is smelling like roses right now, and I guess the ACC doesn't necessarily have the same opportunity to do what the Big 12 did. The Big 12 was massively aided by, in 2022, all of the conference, or I suppose 2023, early part of 2023, all of these schools leaving the Pac-12, they had the ability to jump in and take Colorado, who has become a huge talk of college football, take Arizona, who's going to be one of the top 15 teams in the country this upcoming year, take Utah, who's been one of the most consistent programs in the country for the past pretty much since Kyle Whittingham has gotten there, and take Arizona State, who is an up-and-coming brand in this sport and has a coach that is not afraid to speak his mind and will create some different headlines for you. So basically, the Big 12 had the ability to fill with teams that are roughly on the same level, if not slightly above the people that they had there prior, right? When you talk about Kansas State and Utah, they're roughly on the same level, and they are the teams that are kind of setting the pace out there for the Big 12 this year, and one of those teams is brand new. I don't think the ACC has the ability to do that because when they backfill, they can't backfill from another Power 5 conference. It's just impossible at this point because there's none left. No one's going to leave the Big 12 right now to join a conference that is losing members. Obviously, no one's leaving the SEC or the Big 10. So you're relegated to the Sun Belt, to Conference USA, to the different conferences around you that are at a lower level. And there are plenty of really, really good teams to pick from, obviously, for the ACC, and that's a great thing for them. But at the end of the day, Troy is not Colorado. App State is not Arizona or Utah. So there is that part of it, right? You don't have the ability to backload the same way that the Big 12 was able to, and that creates a ton of problems because you have 17 teams, 3 of which just came in. All of those teams could be looking for a new home if the ACC is not very careful with how the rest of this suit plays out and then what happens after this suit, because it could be an absolute windfall of teams leaving if Florida State is able to get out for pretty much any number under around $250, $300 million. There are a ton of teams that have the ability to pull that off because they know if they go to the Big Ten or if they go to the SEC, they're getting that money back fairly quickly. Let's be honest. So you're no longer scared to pay that bill. You'd be a little bit more scared to pay $700 billion or $700 million. $700 billion would be out of this world. But paying $700 million is not something that every school in that conference can do. But $200 million, $100 million, they absolutely can. So that creates an interesting couple of months here, and I think the ACC kind of needs ESPN in this battle here. Obviously, there are still a ton of things to figure out with all of this. What is ESPN's motivation by getting into this? What does this mean for the relationship between ESPN and Florida State down the road? But at the end of the day, there are a lot of things changing. There are a lot of moving parts, and conference realignment has created a lot of questions about the future of the sport. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm ready to get to a place of stability. And I think at the very least we're on our way there. And it will come at the expense probably of the ACC as we know it. It will come with a lot of teams moving in the next little bit. But at the end of the day, I hope at least we can get to a place, whether it's this year or next year or in 2026 even, where we can look at the landscape of college football and at least know what it looks like. Because I think there are a ton of people out there that just don't know what it's going to look like down the road, so they don't know if they want to sign on for the down the road or not. But the second we know what this looks like, the second we have an idea of just how this is going to affect everything and just who is going to be playing who and what matchups we're getting and how the playoff works and all of this different stuff that has no answer. Once we get to a place where we have at least an idea of what we're dealing with, I think there's much more people that would be willing to and able to fully make a decision of what their future with the sport is. And I tend to believe a lot of people would still stick around because I think it's going to be a better situation than a lot of people expect, but it's going to be a lot different. So strap in, essentially. It's going to be another weird spring with a lot of teams bouncing around to different conferences. But I like to think that this might be the last landslide until we have at least a little time to sit still and catch our breath and come to terms with what this new era of college football is going to look like. But we are going to take a short break here. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about D linemen and linebackers in the combine. They reported yesterday and are going through some tests and stuff today. We'll go through workouts on Thursday, so thought I would break down a couple of guys from each of those positions, the defensive end, defensive tackles, and linebackers, to watch throughout this week and into this weekend. But stick with us, and we will be right back.